Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us going since we have a pretty good group here now. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me. I want to give a bit of a disclaimer perhaps. This is actually an all new curriculum for this course that I'm launching this month. It's still very new to me, as almost as new as it is to you. So it might be a little bit of bumps along the way, but hopefully I will have all that ironed out. So I was actually scrambling to make sure all my slides were in order just before we got started. But I'm excited for it, and I think it's a better, a little bit better course than it was even a month ago. And in fact, all this material this week on visual story is newly added. That's not something I had covered before. So exciting new stuff. And welcome, Judah. Okay, so I'm going to try not to turn this completely into a lecture, and hopefully I can get some discussion going on a little later. I'm going to do a little bit of lecture, unfortunately, just to introduce some of the concepts, but really I'm relying on some of the material that you did with the exploration to serve as the lecture component, and now we can really dive into some of these topics. So hopefully it won't just be me talking, because that would get boring, and we can take a look at some of these ideas and how they apply to what we are doing as media professionals. So this is a bit of an unusual course in that, well, perhaps in line with the courses you've taken so far, New Media Tools and the introductory course, is in that these are all foundations that you are setting so that you'll be prepared for the more specific courses that come later, things like digital video and digital audio and web design and graphic design. These courses really set the stage for that. So the concepts that we are going to explore this month really are meant to apply to in any of those contexts, no matter what specific discipline of media you're working with. Hopefully what we cover this month will apply there and kind of inform your decisions as a media planner and strategist and creator. So let's start off with the question, what exactly is aesthetics? This is an unusual word that not everyone has really thought too much on. We use it a lot in conversation. But what does it mean? How would you define what aesthetics is? Okay, Randy says the look and feel of something, and Judah says the way looks make you feel. So kind of the emotions associated with how something looks. And in casual conversation, we might use that term to refer to a particular look or style. Something has an attractive aesthetic, or a Southwestern aesthetic, or an industrial aesthetic, kind of referring to a specific type of style. And that's perfectly valid if you're using it in that casual sense. The term actually comes from a branch of philosophy that dealt with visual art and explored, as Judah said, the emotive values related to appreciating and creating beauty. So defining what evokes that sense of appreciation for beauty. And this is, of course, a branch of philosophy, so there's a lot of different ideas and different points of view. The two paintings that I have on the screen are both considered works by great artists. One is by Jackson Pollock, that's the one on the left, and the other is by Claude Monet on the right. And clearly, these are vastly different, but both of these are appreciated as great works in their specific genres of art. One is abstract modern art, and one is impressionist, which is perhaps much more easily appreciated. It's a landscape scene with flowers and trees and things that we could easily recognize and find beautiful, whereas the other maybe is a more acquired taste or a more exacting taste. So clearly a lot of subjective points of view involved in this. But as modern day media professionals, we really can't work with that kind of amorphous idea. We need something more concrete that we can apply to our work in ways that we know we're going to get results from, right? So in a more modern sense, we have applied media aesthetics. And if you take a look at this definition, it's a process in which we examine a number of media elements, how they interact, and our perceptual reactions to them. What do you see there as the main difference? What's changed from this definition, or the purpose and appreciating and creating beauty? Does anything stand out as being noticeably like a key difference in this view? Okay, and the one point that I was going for there was what is underlined here, perceptual reactions, because in this previous definition, it was focused specifically on beauty, creating something that could be seen as beautiful. Now we're talking about something much more open-ended, perceptual reactions. Beauty, finding something beautiful, is a perceptual reaction, but we could also have a very negative reaction. We might find something repulsive or upsetting or scary. Or at the same time, it might be something that's very funny, perhaps not beautiful, but amusing. So it opens it up to a wide spectrum of possible emotions. And so if we study how different media elements, and when I say media elements, I'm talking about imagery, color, the style of the typography. These are topics that we'll explore this month. It could even include sound, which we don't investigate in this course, but is a factor as well. If you think about movie soundtracks and scores, how those evoke feelings. So this applied media aesthetics is studying how all those things interact to create a specific reaction. And if we understand that, then we can plan for it. And then as media strategists, media planners, and creators, you can build that into your own work. So hopefully that's what we're going to get out of this month, is an idea of how some of those factors interact with one another, how different elements play a part in creating a specific reaction in our audience. And if you've looked at the curriculum in FSO, you see that we're kind of taking this in stages, which you're probably used to that arrangement by now. But in exploring this topic, we're going to first look at the imagery that's involved, the words that it's involved, and how those two combine to tell a story. And then from there, we'll get into more specific elements like color. How does color evoke emotions? What kind of energy does it bring to an image? And so forth. And then in week 3, we'll look at typography, the style of the text, as well as the topic of visual hierarchy, which means what catches your attention first and how do you guide the viewer's experience. So first, let's talk about emotion and the visual story. And I was saying earlier that visual story is a new topic for this course, so bear with me as if I should stumble a bit on the way, but hopefully not. So one of the most fundamental aspects of creating media is to convey a message, right? That's really the purpose, regardless of the medium, is to get something across to your audience, whether it's to inform them, to entertain them, to educate them, or to influence their attitudes or opinions, like you see with a campaign ad. So the key to doing that is to use compelling imagery that supports your message, and to use words that support your message, and ideally to use those two that work together to create a unified and stronger message than either one by itself. When we talk about emotions and perceptual reactions, that's a pretty big topic. There's an infinite number of different emotional states that we might have: anger, sadness, joy, being nostalgic or sympathetic, all these different feelings. And go ahead and make sure your microphones are muted. I hear someone talking in the background. So it would be, in dealing with all these possible emotions, it would really be difficult to really manage all those possibilities. So what I've done with this course is included this model of emotional design. This was created by a writer named Donald Norman, and he dealt with he talked mostly about physical products and how we react to physical products. Like, he really talked a lot about teapots, which seemed to be his thing, whether we appreciated them for the way they looked or the way they were helpful, utilitarian, they were useful, or if they had sentimental value. And he created these 3 levels. And in his model, we could assign any of those various feelings, those various emotions, to one of these 3 levels. So it makes it a little more manageable. And the reason I bring this up is because as you approach a media project, one of the early questions is, how am I going to appeal to my audience? How am I going to make this matter to them and get their attention? And so with this model, you can kind of plan where you want to reach them on an emotional level. If you're out after this course in the workplace, you might not ever talk about visceral design or behavioral design, but it's simply a helpful model. And the point is that thinking about how you're going to reach your audience is one of those fundamental questions, and it should be something that comes to mind. Looking at these different levels, this goes from really, this is kind of upside down, because visceral level is really the lowest level. It's the most fundamental level of thought and emotion. And this is based on instinct and gut reactions, these feelings you get when you see something that's upsetting or exciting, that just happens before you really think about it. It's all based on sensory experiences. So where visceral is instinctive, it's not learned, it's something that just happens innately. Behavioral emotion is learned, things that we've learned to appreciate or react to. Oftentimes this is something that's useful to us, like a new tool or a kitchen appliance or something that serves a purpose. I also lump fandom into this. So if you're a Star Trek fan or a music, you have a particular musician that you're a big fan of, if you see something related to them, you've learned to appreciate that and you have an emotional reaction to it. And reflective is the higher level. This is our ability, which is supposedly uniquely to us as human beings, to think long term and remember the past and be sentimental, think about problem solving and big picture questions, meaning of life kind of stuff. So just some quick examples, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because we're going to get into some storytelling in a minute. But at the visceral level, these are some of these gut reactions, these things that are innate and part of our instincts. One of these things is danger avoidance. And so including the imagery of a dangerous predator, something that might cause our little reptile brains to react to try to go into survival mode. Like the snake here. Sex appeal is a part of it at the visceral level. And this is a very suggestive image. This is actually someone's feet, but it's arranged in a way that looks like a human form. Or something that's just exciting and visually stimulating, like the rocket, the runner riding a cheetah riding a rocket, which is completely absurd, but you see that and you react to it, thinking, just the visual spectacle of it. Looking at that snake, that electrical outlet, this is an interesting point, and this came from someone's exploration today. When you look at this, what do you see? Okay, Judas's facial expressions. Are there particular feelings being expressed? Okay, and is it Olishe? Says smiling faces, and Randy says angry sockets. Anger on the left and shock on the right. Yeah, and so notice that you're applying emotional states to something that really has no emotion. This is an inanimate object, but it's our natural inclination to apply meaning and interpret, especially faces in particular. That's something that we are hardwired to do. So we are able to see this, but this also works with photos of people. If we see them, this is actually called mirror neurons in our brain, that if we see an expression, our brains trigger us to feel that feeling so that we have that sense of empathy. That's where empathy comes from. It's we understand the emotions that others around us are feeling. And this works with human faces most of the time, but also non-human faces, like this very stalwart looking dog in the pound. The message is he may be small, but you should see his heart. And look at that expression. There's a lot of dignity and courage and strength being expressed there. And the designer of this ad was very well aware of that, of the idea that we would see that and feel that feeling. And odds are they have manipulated this photo in Photoshop in some way to enhance the more human qualities of the face in order to increase the response that we would have on viewing it. And that's a very useful concept, something especially in storytelling, that idea that we will reflect or mirror back the emotions that we see directed to us. And behavioral design, the focus changes. Now it's all about usefulness, utilitarian, what kind of innovative features the phone offers, or how much easier your job gets with this particular tool, how much cargo space the car has. Not really looking at how physically attractive the car is, but simply what it can do for you. And reflective design. And this is that level where we're talking about sentimentality, like the fishing with dad, nothing happened and yet everything happened message. That's kind of, some might say sappy, but it's very touchy feeling. Or bigger issues like in the lower right, the issue of body shaming with the girls holding their phones to take pictures. Or this one that I find particularly striking, and you might have to look close, this might be smaller on your side, but of the eyes peering through the fabric of the sweater. And it's a comment on child labor in sweatshops. Are there any comments or questions so far? This is something I had you comment on in the exploration, kind of as a secondary topic, but it plays a part, and we'll look at that specifically within the stories. Yeah, I would say that the question was, can one say reflective design is how the ads get to you emotionally? Reflective design is probably what we would traditionally consider emotions, like thinking about the past or remembering times with dad, fishing with dad, or some of those really high level emotions. But if you're thinking about things like hunger, for example, or sexual attraction, or any of these kind of base level feelings, those are more the visceral level. They would still be considered emotions, though. So actually, Judah, yeah, that's a good point too, because a lot of the things that come up in reflective design, and I'll go back a minute, could be considered intellectual problems as well, things that you think about as well as feel. So, like the issue of child labor is something that we understand there's big consequences involved there. We also understand that these children are suffering under terrible conditions. It's not something that we just feel in our gut, although that's a factor as well, but the understanding is much more of an intellectual concept. And another point is that none of these levels really exist in isolation. They're always meshing together and supporting one another. So you might have a visceral level image. In fact, going back here again, this image of the child peering through the fabric could be considered very visceral. We see that and it's surprising. But and then that is the hook that draws us in, that then conveys this reflective level message about the rights and consequences faced by these children. So I want to keep those ideas in mind, and we're going to look at some examples. Actually, most of these examples I took directly from your exploration that I looked at today. By the way, I have given feedback on the explorations. Take a look at what I have there, because sometimes I'll comment on things that perhaps you were involved in the examples you chose, but that you didn't comment on, to point out a few additional things, or sometimes clarify some ideas. But it's good to take a look at that, even if you got a 100 on the assignment, just to make sure everything is clear. But most of these examples I did pull from that activity, because you guys picked some really good examples of visual stories. So kudos to you. And a visual story, as the Linda lesson explained, is a story that is implied through imagery. So even if it's a still image, just a photograph, there still can be a story, but especially when you combine words and imagery together. Sometimes just adding some words turns an image into a story. So for example, these caverns for National Geographic for Kids, just adding those words, "Here I come, ready or not," now suddenly this is a pretty epic game of hide and seek. Whereas otherwise it would have been very majestic and very impressive looking natural formations, but you don't have that childlike personal touch. And then there's the idea of the protagonist. And this is who's the main character of this story. And the protagonist sometimes is very obvious and sometimes is not quite so obvious. Sometimes we don't see the protagonist. Sometimes we are the protagonist. In this case, who would you say the protagonist is? And that's the hero of the story, or the main character. And Randy says the children. Which children, though? Who are being dared to explore. So in essence, the viewer is, whoever is looking at this. We're kind of from the point of view of someone inside this cavern, and someone outside the cavern says, "Here I come, ready or not." So it's essentially we are taking part in this game. We are sort of being drawn into this game of hide and seek. And since this is geared toward kids, so we can try to put ourselves into that role as well, and imagine, the young mind that's being invited to experience all these natural wonders. I'm right there with you, Randy. I would love to visit there. Okay, how about this one? Who is our protagonist in this case? Okay, yeah, in this case, it's the viewer again, and the reason being, look at both the imagery and the words. Decide if your child deserves them. So it's you. It's talking to you. You decide. So it's kind of putting you in this fictional scenario. You come in here and you find this child, that your child has scratched pretty complex looking formulas and calculations into the side of this classic muscle car. On one hand, it's pretty impressive that they're able to do that. On the other, they've totally defaced this beautiful car. Have you? How did you reach that decision, Randy? Randy says he's decided to give them the chocolate. Yeah, so Randy gives them the chocolate to award their genius that could eventually buy 2 cars, and Judah says that's going to be a long conversation. I think both of those things might be true, but it's pretty upsetting. But yeah, so you see how it puts you in that scenario. And the other part of it that I didn't mention, in addition to the protagonist, is the story problem. So if you put yourself in the role of the person designing this ad, coming up with this concept, the story problem becomes, hey, how would you react if you found this? That the problem, the child has scratched all this stuff into the side of this car. It's sort of the hypothetical question. How would you react? Or what would you do? What is the impending danger or the problem being faced? No chocolate, no punishment, just hours of lecture to make sure his art is worth it to him. Gotcha. And I'm realizing that too many of the examples I have here put you, the viewer, as the protagonist. And this is there was a series of these, and I think 2 of you chose examples from this series for the exploration, and these are really, really cleverly done. But I would say in this case as well, the viewer is put in the role of the protagonist, and or perhaps there could be a third party that we don't see, but there is someone who's addicted to ketchup so much so that they just put it on everything, including these donuts, which is just a blasphemy to me, because why would you ruin donuts like that? Yes, they definitely have a problem. The other one was sushi, putting ketchup on sushi, which is equally abominable. Steak, I would say, is justified, but then again, I'm a vegetarian, so perhaps my opinion doesn't count there. And the problem, in this case, becomes the addiction, the addicted to Heinz, addicted to ketchup. And here's a question for you. Now that we've talked about the emotional design, what level of emotional design would you put this at? Or levels? Which levels are involved here? Okay, Judah says visceral, and Randy says visceral as well. How do you see that embodied in the design? By the way, feel free to unmute your mic if you'd like to talk, besides typing. Yeah, there's that. Randy, you said immediately say ew, and And Judith says he gets really grossed out by the image. If I'm being honest, yeah, I mean, we know from experience what ketchup tastes like, and we know what donuts taste like, and those two things are not something you really want together. So yeah, there's that immediate ew reaction. And I would say there's also a bit of a behavioral aspect here as well, kind of implied that this is a must-have product. It's, it's so good that you'll become addicted to it. So it's that espousing the quality of the product. And the image looks funny to you. Funny in a good way, or a humorous way, or just not right kind of way. Yeah, it does not compute in our brains because that's not something we would typically approve of. And here's this little fella again. And finally, we have one where we're not the protagonist. It's actually talking about this little dog to us, that he is the main character now. And it's got a long message that I haven't read entirely. But now looking at this one, where would you put this in the emotional design categories? Okay, and the question was, couldn't the viewer be considered a protagonist in every ad because ultimately the company is asking us for something? Well, I wouldn't say every time. We always are involved. Sometimes we're an observer. So sometimes we're strictly the audience, and they're talking to us. So think about what story is being told here, and who the characters are. Yeah, and it's true, every ad is going to be trying to influence you in some way, whether it's to buy a product or vote a certain way or have a particular attitude or opinion. But the way they convince you of that sometimes involves the visual story. And so look at the story that's being told. In this case, we're seeing a story about a little dog with a big heart. A little bit of a pout. I kind of took that as being sort of a determination, a very sentimental looking face. And for my previous question, as far as the emotional design, I would say there's certainly a visceral element at play, as we saw with the facial expressions and playing upon our sense of empathy, and also some reflective aspects going on there as well, with the message about shelter dogs and what good pets and companions they can be. And the fishing with Dad. And this one, if you look at who's talking and who are they talking to, it's a story being told to us but this person's reflecting upon their own experience, so putting themselves as the protagonist, whoever Randy H is. It's not you. No, you're Randy S. So a visual story will always have a protagonist, will typically have a story problem, and some ways that you can make this really engaging is to make use of these concepts, these ideas of surprise. Surprise can be many different things. As the Linda lecture covered, they can use humor or poignancy, which is sort of playing upon some of these reflective level messages, like we saw with the child labor ad, or suspense, things that are potentially scary. We'll start off with one that's a little lighter. And what's the surprise element here? And I think she used the term surprise to really mean anything that's just sort of seems eye-catching or absurd in the Linda lesson. So let's talk about this one for a minute. What's the story happening here? And who would be our protagonist in this case? Yeah, Randy says the baby doesn't have a spot on her, and he reads that pretty accurate. And not only that, but look at the look on that child's face. That looks like a look of satisfaction and achievement. Very pleased with her work. And the dad, surprisingly, doesn't really look upset about this. Actually looking impressed, perhaps because the Huggies clean wipes have gotten the baby pretty clean, whereas everything else in the area is destroyed or covered in spaghetti sauce. This is that poignancy element, and it's still a surprise because it takes a second to look at this before you realize there are eyes peering back at you from behind this curtain of yarn. It looks like two faces. One is almost hidden over here. So when you see that, then you have that visceral, oh my gosh, feeling. One thing I see a lot, and especially I seem to see this on the more reflective level, high level ad designs, is that while they still make use of imagery and words, the words are always in these little tiny print that it almost allows the imagery to take the lead in catching your attention and getting that kind of initial visceral response. And then you are allowed to take in the verbal message and you say, oh, okay, I see what's happening here. This one's very similar to that. It's kind of a slow burn where you finally realize what's being said there. And of course, you have this woman's bare back, which immediately you might not know what's going on here, but there's a tattoo that's obviously being spotlighted. And this is actually our next topic, which is visual metaphor, and that is comparing the permanent consequences of drunk driving to the permanency of a tattoo. And the tattoo says, I hit and killed the Browns, and has a date. So it's something that the person is left with. So really heavy message. And it has this story behind it. It's not as straightforward a story as we might see with, say, the hide and seek or the child scratching the car. We immediately know that scenario, but this one we really have to kind of dig into before we understand what's going on there. I know in the Linda lesson, she combined visual metaphor with surprise, and I think that's perfectly valid because once you interpret the metaphor, then you understand and you see the surprise meaning behind all the imagery. I combine it in my materials with symbolism because ultimately that's what it is. It's something that represents an idea that's different than what you would immediately expect. It requires some interpretation. So I've put these together, and some of your examples from your exploration were really great for illustrating this idea. This one was really very striking. So let's talk about this one. What is the metaphor here? By the way, this is an ad for corrective fluid, like whiteout. And the slogan is right the wrong. Okay. And what was that about from 1912? I'm not sure what that was referring to. And Randy, if you want to share, you can go ahead. Oh, okay. So you're seeing a racial interpretation with the demon and the angel, with maybe through the skin colors. Okay, that's a pretty good point. And that's true of I think in the Linda lesson she actually mentions that is that you don't want to accidentally convey a meaning that really wasn't intended. So you have to look out for symbolism or meaning that someone might take from this that really isn't what you're going for, but just because of the look. So perhaps this could be a cautionary tale in that regard. The intent here is to compare fixing a typo with the correcting fluid to kind of expelling a demon with the angel kind of banishing the demon. So it's a metaphor in that sense, but I suppose we can take more lessons from this than just that. This next one is a little bit upsetting, I'll warn you up front, but to see, but a really striking visual, the way it's presented. What's our metaphor in this case? And yeah, I would definitely agree that last one of the angel and the demon had some it could have some sexual implications as well. So definitely a lot of visceral level elements going on there. And this one is really extremely gut-wrenching. What is the metaphor though? What if you look at this, what's being compared here? Verbal abuse is still abuse. Yeah. The tiny message at the bottom is help juvenile protective associations stop all child abuse. And if you look at what is being pictured, the child is very upset and very hurt. But the hand that's threatening him is made up of words, and they're all hurtful things that you could say to a child, or names, things like moron, punk, fool, you're such and something that you can't really see, pig. A lot of them are hard to read, but all of them are very, very hurtful things to say to a child. So it is making that visual comparison of the words to physical harm. And on a somewhat lighter note, this one is another one from your exploration, comparing the spice of these noodles. It looks like a ramen noodle package to literal fire. And she's a fire eater, so you're eating fire, which does not appeal to me at all, but I know some people enjoy that. The spice, I mean. Low calorie and low nutrient, is that what you're saying? Oh, okay. And ending again on a heavy note, this one again was from one of your exploration submissions. In the verbal messages, the Moroccan government covers up cases of torture, and it's visually representing that. Very, in almost a literal sense, the Moroccan flag covering up the victim. Okay, and that was my last example. So the idea of visual story is something that is it's a very powerful tool to use, regardless of what kind of visual media you're working with, even if it's video. And in fact, I think I want to say it was it you, Todd, that had some video commercials from We Love Ad as your examples, and it was present there as well. There was, I wish I had included it here, but the one where there's a man proposing marriage to his girlfriend on the beach, and a pirate runs up and steals the ring and runs off. And it's sort of like, where did that come from? And so it's the same idea of a visual story taking place and using surprise. So all these can apply in those cases as well, or in that medium as well. Were there any questions or any last thoughts on any of these examples that we looked at so far? Yeah, Judah, then I think this is the one you're referring to, makes you ask questions about America and yourself. Yeah, and certainly a lot of these are very thought-provoking. that can go far beyond the ads themselves and the surface meanings of the ads. And Randy, We Love Ad is a great resource to look at. Most of the ads that are on there have been award-winning or recognized in some way. So I always like to use that. Next week, we're turning from ads to movie posters. So I just want to keep this more media neutral and not focus on any single thing. But so we'll take a look at how color is used. But book covers would be it's a good idea. I hadn't thought of that. And websites as well is one I want to work in here somewhere. So your next step, you've done your exploration, you're going to do an analysis, and we're going to probably use the same ad throughout the course. You're going to analyze based on factors of visual story, of color, and typography, and visual hierarchy. And I would say the analysis activity is sort of the equivalent of a quiz or test. And then we are going to have each week a project. And the project for this month is going to be developing a mood board. And a mood board is a way of visually brainstorming. So here's an example. It's sort of a collage where you collect ideas. So if you are, say, a graphic designer, and this has become popular for graphic designers to use in planning their projects, you would have this blank page, and you would just collect ideas, whether it's previous designs that have been done by other designers that you liked some element of a particular style, and you think, I would like to incorporate something along these lines into my design. You also will include color palette ideas, typography, potential typefaces that you'll use, any kind of design factor that might go into a design. This is your way of planning that up front. So that's what you're going to be working on over the next 3 weeks, starting this weekend. Actually, I guess Monday, since it's a holiday. What we're going to do is we're going to use your personal brand as a media professional. So say your goal is to become a PR representative, then you would focus on your presentation as a PR rep. How would you present yourself in order to attract clients, for example? So we're going to start off with simply figuring out what your concept is. What is your story going to be? And start collecting images that look like something that you would like to use. Like if you see ads or any kind of imagery graphics that you think, I would really like to use something along those lines, start collecting that. And that's going to be your project. I've provided a template to use for that, and you'll turn it into me each week with new information added to it as we go along. This is a tool that you can use beyond this course. So the idea of a mood board, so if you move ahead and you're doing your video projects or your web design projects, and in fact, this same technique is used in the web design class. You can use that to plan those designs, and you can use it to plan alternate design ideas. So if you have several different concepts and you don't know which one you want to go with, or your client isn't sure which one they want to go with, you can use this to visualize. So this first week, you're going to come up with a concept. It could be what kind of story you want to present, and what emotional connections you want to make with your clients or your public, and then start collecting images. Next week, you'll continue the same mood board, but you'll add your color palettes to it after we examine the idea of color theory. And then finally, you'll start selecting typefaces of a style that represents your visual image. Any questions or final thoughts? I'm hoping it'll be fun, Randy. Thanks. Yeah, so we'll see how it goes. All right, if everybody feels like they have a good idea of what's going on, then I'm happy to let you go for the evening. I do appreciate you joining me for this hour.